Hello, I'm Caleb, and welcome to Golden Story for Sleep. Here you'll find stories designed to calm your mind, nourish your heart, and reprogram your thoughts for prosperity, inspired by the teachings of Esther and Abraham Hicks. Relax, let go, and join me on this journey to attract more abundance while you sleep. Before you drift off into sleep, I'd like to ask you something simple. Subscribe to Golden Story for Sleep. When you do this, YouTube understands that these stories matter to you and will show you more content that feeds your mind with prosperity and abundance every night. Together, we can create a powerful habit, ending every day with thoughts that transform your life. I want to know from you, at what moment in this story did sleep begin to arrive? Leave a comment below sharing how your experience was while listening to this tale. You have walked with quiet steps through the day, allowing each moment to unfold without rush. And now, here, in this stillness, you can feel the soft rhythm of life moving toward you. There is nothing to chase, nothing to prove. The air itself seems to lean in, carrying with it the threads of what is already yours. As you rest, your breathing slow and deep, you may notice that the world feels lighter, as though something unseen has been rearranging itself in your favor. Every inhale invites more ease. Every exhale releases the weight of what no longer serves you in this quiet space. You remember, prosperity is not a thing to earn or deserve. It is a natural state you are already connected to, like the gentle tick of a clock that moves only when you are ready. Opportunities advance toward you when you are aligned with them. So now, as you sink deeper into rest, let your mind soften around these truths. You are safe. You are supported. You are already standing where your blessings arrive. There is no need to hurry, for life is not behind you, and it is not ahead of you. It is here, in this very moment, opening its hands to you. Feel the quiet certainty of knowing that every step you take, even the smallest, is enough. Feel the calm joy in trusting that nothing good can pass you by. The current of abundance moves to meet you, always in perfect timing. Let your thoughts become lighter now. Everything I need flows to me with ease. I am always in the right place. At the right time, what I seek is already seeking me as you drift. Imagine these words settling gently in your mind, like seeds resting in fertile soil. They do not need your constant watch, for they already know how to grow, and so you rest. And as you rest, the world quietly rearranges itself, placing each piece exactly where it belongs, until you awaken to find that what you once hoped for is now simply part of your life. Let's start the story. The first hint of morning arrived as a thin, pearly band along the bottom edge of the curtain. Not enough to brighten the room, only enough to suggest that light existed somewhere beyond. Fabre. He felt it before he saw it. The way the air changes just before dawn. A gentler coolness on the skin, a quieter tone in the silence. He lay on his back for several long breaths, not moving, letting his body learn the day at the same careful pace the day was learning him. His left hand rested over his diaphragm, the other along the edge of the blanket. Inhale. The ribs widened a fraction under his palm. Exhale. The hand settled with a subtle weight, as if agreeing. He noticed the tiny pause between breaths on a narrow doorway. Then another breath came, unforced. He let that rhythm build itself, steady and low, like a tide making appointments with the shore. I waken to ease, he thought, not as an instruction, but as a quiet observation. The words did not press. They floated when he rolled onto his side. The blanket slid with a whisper. The sheet beneath his knee was cool. The mattress answered with the faintest sigh. He waited until the world inside his chest felt unhurried, then guided his legs over the edge of the bed. The soles of his feet found the floor, the way a hand finds a friend's shoulder, gently, would cool, grain smooth in one direction, a little rough in the other. He explored the texture with a small shift of weight, left foot, then right. Ground holds me, and I meet it lightly. Another thought that did not need to be repeated to become true. He straightened his spine by degrees, stacking vertebrae like books, placed back on a shelf in their proper order. His shoulders broadened with the movement, his jaw softened. He tilted his head left, then right, feeling the long muscles lengthen along the neck. Then let the chin draw a slow semicircle toward the chest and back to neutral. Eyes closed, he found the window with his face and felt the faintest brush of cooler air on his eyelids. The room still carried last night's warmth in its corners. Sweetness, a fabric, and a trace of soap from the folded shirt on the chair. He stood. Not quickly. He let the knees unlock, the hips shift, the weight pass through ankles that had been sleeping too. The floor creaked, a note low, friendly. He placed the first step forward, lifted the second, and crossed the small distance to the curtain. 2 fingers took the hem and lifted it an inch. Dawn replied with a pale gray that promised color later. He released the fabric and turned slightly, palms meeting in front of his chest. Not a formal prayer, only a way to join hands with himself. Breath again, in for 4, out for 6. On the exhale, his ribs felt less like a cage and more like a gate swinging open. He moved to the chair where his slippers waited under it like 2 small boats facing the same direction. He slid his feet in, heel to heel, a soft thud when they found home. The robe hung from the backrest. He pinched the collar, shook the fabric once to loosen the night it had gathered, and wrapped it around his shoulders. The belt found its own knot-to motions, a pull, a settling. The cotton kissed his forearms, as if it remembered him. The room asked for light, but not brightness. He passed his hand along the bedside lamp and turned the switch until the filament hummed at a low glow. The shade cast a honey-colored oval on the wall. Dust motes organized themselves in the new geography. He liked the way the light did not erase the dark, only negotiated fair borders with it. He crossed to the basin. The porcelain held water from last night, a clear, quiet pool. He tipped it out, turned the tap, let the stream run until it cooled. From pipe warm to fresh, both hands became a bowl. He lifted water to his face and let it slide forehead, cheeks, lips, chin, neck. The first shock made him inhale. The second pass made him smile. He reached for the towel hanging from the hook, pressed it once to each cheek, once to the brow, and left the fabric there, a heartbeat longer than necessary. I greet the day gently. The day greets me the same. The mirror above the basin contained a quiet version of him. Not heroic, not diminished, just accurate. He watched the breath move his collarbone. He noted the soft shadow under each eye and the way the corners of his mouth were already less heavy than yesterday. He lifted his right hand and smoothed the eyebrow with the pad of a finger, then combed his hair back with 4 slow passes. Each pass made a small difference. Small differences compound. The mirror knew. He opened the cabinet. Toothbrush. A thin ribbon of paste. He brushed in slow circles, counting not seconds, but motions. Upper back, left 16. Upper front 12. Upper back, right 16. Lower right 16. Lower front 12, or left 16. He rinsed with 2 mouthfuls of water, spit, ran the tap a second longer to listen to the simple promise of flow. Life moves easily where I allow it. He did not say it aloud. The water said it for him. In the kitchen, the kettle waited on the back burner like a faithful instrument. He set it forward, turned the knob until the flame wore a small blue crown, placed his palm over the spout to feel the faint push of warming air. He measured tea into the strainer 1 rounded spoon, and a second for the patience he was practicing. He reached for the mug. The chipped rim caught a bit of light and threw it back at him. He set the mug in the center of the counter's seam, a little ritual of alignment, small, private, yes. While the water gathered itself to a boil, he opened the window 2 inches. Outside, morning had unrolled another stripe of silver. Along the roofs, somewhere a bird tried 3 notes and liked them enough to repeat. The air slid across the sill, bringing with it stone, damp, and the first suggestion of bread from the bakery down the block. He breathed that in with intention, let it touch the back of his throat, and felt his shoulders fall another ½ inch. The kettle's first murmur rose a low vowel. He turned the flame down, poured the steady stream through the leaves, watched the dark blooms spiral and settle. He closed his eyes and counted 5 slow breaths while it steeped, each exhale longer than the inhale. On the 5th, he lifted the strainer, tapped it twice against the rim, and set it aside. He wrapped both hands around the mug and raised it to his face, letting the heat wash his cheeks. The first sip traveled like a candle being carried down. A hallway 1 door, then the next, lighting softly as it passed. Warmth arrives easily when I make space for it. He carried the tea to the small table by the window. The table had a scar where someone once put down a pot, too hot. He rested the mug on the ring as if to say, I remember, and it's all right. He pulled his journal from the drawer. The cover was soft from use. The elastic band had learned its job and did not complain. He opened to a fresh page. The paper was willing. He placed the pen in his fingers the way a violinist places a Bautham here. Index there. The other 3 as quiet company. He did not write immediately. He looked at the page as if at a lake at dawn, waiting until the surface was calm enough to reflect without distortion. The first line arrived by itself. I enter this morning lightly. The hand moved without dragging. The second line followed. Unforced, I let small goodnesses find me. He did not ask what they would be or when. Asking would have tightened the grip. Instead, he wrote, I am met halfway, and the pen made the M with a little flourish, as if glad to be included. He set the pen down, turned the mug a quarter turn, and watched steam thread itself through the glimmer of light by the curtain. He listened. The building spoke its soft language pipes ticking as they cooled. A neighbor's floorboard echoing a step. The elevator cable giving a low, satisfied hum somewhere far off. He let those sounds be the orchestra for his first blessing. He closed his eyes, brought his hands together again, not as a duty, but as a way to collect his attention into one place. The thumbs rested lightly against the sternum, that quiet door. He felt the heart beat under them steady, unambitious. He inclined his head the width of a breath. And then, before words, he allowed the feeling he wanted the words to carry, not pleading, not proving gratitude that preceded its reasons, warmth that did not require evidence. He waited until that feeling expanded enough to brush the edges of his ribs from inside. Only then did he let the blessing begin, not spoken out loud, but formed with the softness of thought. Bless this morning as it finds me. A gentle day meets a gentle heart. Where I walk, ease walks with me. Where I look, kindness shows its face. What I need has already started toward me. He paused between lines long enough to feel them land, like seeds placed one by one in good soil. Each pause let the body agree, then the mind followed. He breathed once more and added a sentence shaped like a smile. I am willing to be surprised by how well this goes. The corners of his mouth answered. He opened his eyes. The room had not changed, and it had. The light had climbed an inch up the wall. The oval from the lamp had shifted right. He took another sip. The tea now carried a deeper note, as if steeping had been the story of the last few minutes, and he had become part of it. He rose from the chair with care, toes pressing into the slippers to find purchase. He moved to the sink, rinsed the strainer, let the water run over his fingers until the sensation of warmth became a memory rather than a fact. He shook his hands once, lightly, and watched the drops bead and fall. He dried them on the towel. The same towel folded again. Edge aligned with edge, small order invited larger order. He returned to the window and drew the curtain a hand's width aside. Outside, the sky had begun deciding on a color the faintest pearl, turning slowly toward linen, toward milk, toward blue. A delivery truck idled 2 streets over. A distant punctuation mark that did not break the sentence. A woman in a dark coat crossed beneath a lamp and disappeared around the corner. The bakery's door opened. The smell arrived sooner than sound. He closed the curtain again to preserve the room's slow unfolding. On the dresser, the watch his grandfather left him lay face down on a small square of cloth. He lifted it with his left hand and turned it over onto his right palm. The crystal had a scratch near the 7. He pressed the crown. The second hand ticked once, then again mothered by the mark. He listened to that small, consistent assurance and let it sink with his own breathing. Life keeps time with me when I keep time with myself. He set the watch down, slid open the top drawer, and chose a clean shirt by touch. Cotton, weight, familiar collar that would not argue. He laid it across the bedspread and smoothed it with the flats of his hands, first left to right, then top to bottom. The button placket aligned with a stripe in the blanket. He nodded at the accidental symmetry. He unknotted the robe and folded it along its seams, laying it over the chair where it had begun. The air touched his forearms and reminded him to move a little faster now. Not rushed, merely in step with the morning. As it gained confidence, he dressed away 1 strings, a well-tuned instrument, 1 button. Breathe. The next, breathe. He tucked the hem gently, felt the waistband settle at the familiar notch on his hips. He shook the sleeves down his arms and smoothed the cuffs. The mirror kept him honest but kind. He leaned in close enough to see the tiny constellation of freckles near his right eye and change, stepped back enough to include the line of his shoulders changed. A little broader, with the posture of someone who had already said yes. To the day at the door, his keys waited in a small, shallow bowl. He ran a finger along their edges, counted them by feel, set them down again. Yet the blessing wanted its full measure, and that measure had one final movement. He returned to the table, sat, and placed both feet flat, ankles under knees, knees under hips. He laid his hands, palms down, on the wood. Then he turned them, palm up, as if to catch light. He looked toward the curtain, but not beyond it. He let the breath find the slowest tempo it could keep without strain. He waited until he could feel the beat in his wrists, and he allowed the last lines to arrive. May my words today lean toward kindness. May my work today proceed without friction. May I notice the help already present. May every door I meet show me its easiest hinge. I am provided for. I am welcome where I go. He did not chase a feeling to confirm the words. He let the words become the feeling. It happened the way bread rises when left alone in a warm room. Not because anyone watches, but because the room is warm enough. He closed the journal, slid the elastic band around it, and stood. The mug was half full. He took one last sip and carried it to the sink, set it down gently, rinsed it without scrubbing, and left it upside down to dry. The lamp turned with a soft click to its off position. The oval on the wall surrendered to the larger gray of day. He slipped his feet out of the slippers and into shoes, tying the laces with a double loop he could trust later. He straightened the mat by the door with the edge of his shoe. He rested his hand on the knob, not to open, only to feel the cool metal ask the warm palm a simple question. Ready? Ready? He said, not loudly, not for effect. The room heard him. The morning heard him. He heard himself, which was the point. He opened the door to the hallway's quiet and stepped through, carrying with him nothing visible and exactly what he needed. The morning after that gentle yet unsettling dawn, the man awoke again before the sun, not by the chime of an alarm, nor by the noise of the world outside, but by an almost imperceptible pull from within, a whisper that he could not quite catch, but that made his body rise before his mind had reasoned why. He sat on the edge of his bed, bare feet meeting the cool wooden floor, toes curling slightly at the contact. The house was still draped in that deep pre-dawn darkness where walls seem to dissolve into shadow, and the air holds a stillness so complete that it feels sacred. He rubbed his eyes slowly, letting his palms press into his sockets, seeing colors swirl in the darkness behind them, soft golds and deep blues, like slow-moving rivers of light. It was in this liminal moment that he felt the same quiet urge he'd followed the day before, to stand, to face the window, and to speak the blessing. He had no proof of its power, yet no evidence that repeating it would shift the tides of his life, but something in him, deeper than thought, told him to continue. He padded across the room, steps muffled by the worn fibers of a small rug, his breath steady and measured. The window overlooked the same quiet street, the same lamppost still flickering faintly as it prepared to surrender to daylight. He could hear the faint murmur of the wind against the old glass, as if the world outside was leaning in to listen. He placed his hands lightly on the windowsill, not gripping, but resting, as though it were a sacred altar. His gaze softened, not focusing on anything specific. The faint silhouettes of tree branches, the shimmer of dew on parked cars, the first faint thread of light rising in the east. His voice, when it came, was quiet but unwavering. I am open to the goodness that already exists for me. I allow what is mine to find me, without struggle, without resistance. The words floated into the air, blending with the breath that carried them, disappearing into the silence as if they had been absorbed by the very fabric of the morning. He waited, not for a sign, but for that small shift. He had begun to recognize a warmth low in his chest, like the gentle glow of an ember. He spoke again. It's the same blessing, but slower this time, each word given the space to echo in his own mind. I am open to the goodness that already exists for me. I allow what is mine to find me, without struggle, without resistance. In that pause, his mind wandered not to doubt, but to curiosity. Could it really be so simple? To let go of the grasping, the endless mental lists, the planning that used to keep him awake at night. He had always been taught that effort was the only currency that could buy results. But now he was experimenting with a different kind of effort, the effort of alignment, of choosing the feeling first and letting reality match it later. He straightened his spine, closing his eyes completely. Behind the darkness of his eyelids, he imagined the blessing as a ripple spreading outward, invisible yet certain. In his mind's eye, it touched strangers walking distant streets, opportunities sitting silently on desks, letters waiting to be written, doors that would one day open to him without him needing to knock. The clock in the corner of the room ticked gently, not urgently, but rhythmically, as if keeping time with the beat of his own heart. It reminded him that this moment was enough, that even if nothing outwardly changed today, something unseen had already begun shifting. After repeating the blessing several more times, he lingered in front of the window, letting the light slowly reveal the details of the street, the cracks in the pavement, the tiny droplets of water on the petals of a flower in the neighbor's garden, the thin veil of mist rising from the ground. These details had always been there, yet somehow, today they felt like they belonged to him, not in the sense of ownership, but in the sense that they were part of the same unfolding story. He moved to the kitchen next, steps unhurried. The air smelled faintly of cedar from the small wooden box he kept near the stove, and the cold tiles under his feet grounded him in the here and now. As the kettle began to hum, he thought of how even this making tea, waiting for water to boil, was an opportunity to practice what the blessing had begun. He poured the steaming water over loose leaves in a small ceramic cup, watching as the color deepened into amber. With each swirl, he imagined abundance steeping into his life in the same way, starting clear and light, becoming richer and fuller with time. At the table, he sat quietly, hands cupped around the warmth of the mug, eyes half closed. He took a slow sip, and with it, another repetition of the blessing, not aloud this time, but silently, letting it hum through his mind like a steady undercurrent. I am open to the goodness that already exists for me. I allow what is mine to find me, without struggle, without resistance. It occurred to him then that this was not just a morning ritual, it was a way of being, that perhaps the proof he sought would not arrive as a sudden flash, but as the gentle accumulation of days lived in this stage one, leaving a quiet layer of alignment, until the life around him naturally reflected the life within. When he finished his tea, he rose, cleaned the cup with deliberate care, and stepped outside. The sun had now crested the horizon, bathing the street in gold. The world seemed freshly painted, colors sharper, air crisper. Even the distant sounds of a dog barking and a bicycle bell felt somehow harmonious as he walked down the street. Hands in his pockets, he felt no urgency to reach a destination. Every step was part of the blessing. Every inhale a silent invitation for more. And though he could not yet see how or when, there was an unshakable sense within him that something quiet, unseen, but already real was making its way toward him, one step at a time. The rain had begun in the night, soft at first, a delicate tapping against the roof, like someone drumming fingers on a wooden table. By the time the man woke, the sound had deepened into a steady rhythm, each drop finding its place in an invisible orchestra. Outside, it was not a cold rain, but the kind that carries with it the smell of fertile earth, as if reminding the world that growth often begins unseen. He lay still for a moment, his body warm under the blanket, eyes closed, simply listening. Each patter of rain seemed to nudge him toward a thought, the blessing. The words were there, ready to be spoken, even before he had moved a muscle. But instead of rushing to stand, he let them drift through him silently first, as if testing their weight. Against the hush of the morning, I am open to the goodness that already exists for me. I allow what is mine to find me, without struggle, without resistance. As the words floated in his mind, he imagined them mingling with the rain, seeping into the ground, feeding roots he could not see. That image stayed with him as he slowly sat up, his bare feet brushing the cool air. He reached for the sweater draped over the chair, its fibers still holding the faint scent of cedar from the wardrobe. Slipping it on felt like a small act of care for himself, one of those quiet decisions that whispered, I matter enough to be warm, to be comfortable. He crossed the room, and each step brought the sound of the rain closer, clearer. At the window, drops streamed down the glass in delicate paths, some merging, others traveling alone. Beyond them, the world was painted in silver tones, the wet bark of trees, the gleam of puddles catching faint light, the blurred outlines of distant houses. He placed both hands on the windowsill, palms open as though ready to receive. His breath fogged the glass faintly, and for a moment he drew a simple curve with his fingertip, a smile. It was a small thing, but it felt like a promise. Out loud now, his voice blended with the sound of rain. I am open to the goodness that already exists for me. I allow what is mine to find me, without struggle, without resistance. The words felt heavier this morning, not in the sense of burden, but in the sense of depth, like a stone dropped into a deep well, sending ripples outward into places he could not see. He repeated them again, slower, imagining each syllable, sinking into the fabric of the day ahead. Behind him, the clock ticked steadily, marking each moment without hurry. He thought of how, not so long ago, mornings had been different, filled with rushing, with mental checklists, with a tightness in his chest that came from believing everything depended on his effort alone. Now, there was space. Space to breathe, to choose, to plant thoughts the way a gardener plants seeds, with the faith that they will grow. Even if he cannot watch them in real time. He turned from the window, moving toward the small table in the corner of the kitchen. The rain's melody followed him, weaving through the faint hum of the refrigerator and the soft creak of the floorboards. On the table sat a journal, its cover worn from years of use. He opened it to a fresh page, the faint scent of paper rising like an old memory. Today, instead of writing tasks or plans, he wrote the blessing in large, deliberate letters. Each curve of ink felt like an act of commitment, not just to the words, but to the man he was becoming by repeating them. Beneath the blessing, he wrote a question. If this blessing were already true, how would I live today? The question hung in the air for a moment, like a bird suspended mid-flight. He didn't rush to answer it. Instead, he let it linger as he rose to make tea. The kettle hissed softly as it heated, the sound almost blending with the rain. He selected a blend of herbs, known not for their strength, but for their gentleness: chamomile and lemon balm. The hot water poured over them. A pale steam rose, carrying the scent of calm. He cupped the mug in both hands, feeling its warmth spread through his fingers, then his palms, then up his arms like a slow, quiet sunrise inside him. He took the mug to the window seat, where the cushion was slightly indented from years of use. Sitting there, he watched the rain gather on the leaves outside, forming droplets so heavy they eventually fell, joining the puddles below. It struck him how effortless the process was. The leaves did not cling to the water, nor resist it. They simply received, then released when the moment came. And so, between sips of tea, he whispered the blessing again. I am open to the goodness that already exists for me. I allow what is mine to find me, without struggle, without resistance. The repetition was no longer an obligation, nor a superstition. It had become something else entirely, an anchor. Each time he spoke it, the noise of the outside world seemed to fade, leaving only the steady rhythm of rain and the quiet assurance that he was already on the path, even if he couldn't see the horizon yet. As the morning unfolded, he dressed, slowly, choosing clothes not for appearance, but for how they felt against his skin. A soft cotton shirt, worn jeans, socks thick enough to keep his toes warm. Every movement was intentional, unhurried, as though the day had all the time in the world, and perhaps it did when he finally stepped outside. The rain had eased to a mist, fine enough to cling to his hair and eyelashes. The street glistened under the soft light, and the air smelled clean, washed of yesterday's weight. He began to walk, not toward any particular destination, but simply to move, to be part of the world's slow awakening. Along the way, he noticed small details: a child's forgotten toy resting on a garden wall, the intricate pattern of raindrops on a spider's web, the way a stranger's umbrella caught the light as they passed. Each detail felt like a quiet gift, as though the blessing had already begun shaping the lens through which he saw the world by the time he returned home. His shoes were damp, and his heart felt inexplicably lighter. He sat once more by the window, the journal open before him. Under the question he had written earlier, he began to answer not with grand plans, but with simple truths. I would breathe more deeply. I would notice the small kindnesses. I would trust that what is meant for me cannot be lost. And at the bottom, as though sealing the page with intention, he wrote the blessing one more time. I am open to the goodness that already exists for me. I allow what is mine to find me, without struggle, without resistance. He closed the journal, and, as the day stretched ahead of him, he realized that proof was no longer the point. The blessing itself was enough. The light had shifted by the time afternoon arrived, stretching long shadows across the wooden floor. The rain had gone entirely now, leaving the air cool and tender, as though the day itself had been rinsed clean. From the kitchen window, he could see droplets still clinging to the edges of leaves, catching the pale sunlight like tiny pieces of glass. He sat at the table with the journal open again, though not to write this time. Instead, he traced the edges of the page with his fingertip, feeling the faint texture of the paper. It reminded him of something he'd once read, that everything carries a frequency, even paper and ink, and that the energy you place into a thing lingers there. He wondered what kind of energy he had been pouring into these pages over the past months. Gratitude, hope, permission to receive. The kettle began to rumble softly on the stove, a low sound that deepened into a whistle. He rose, pouring fresh hot water into a mug where mint leaves swirled slowly. The scent filled the air, sharp yet calming, like a quiet wake-up call to his senses. He carried the mug to the armchair near the window, sinking into the cushions with a sigh that felt as though it came from somewhere deep in his chest. Outside, the street was quiet, only the occasional distant sound of a bicycle bell or a door closing breaking the stillness. He cupped the mug between his palms and let the steam rise toward his face, closing his eyes. In the quiet, the blessing returned not as a thought he forced, but as something that simply wanted to be spoken. His lips formed the words slowly, like savoring the taste of them. I am open to the goodness that already exists for me. I allow what is mine to find me, without struggle, without resistance. The words seemed to echo inward, not just in his mind, but somewhere deeper, like dropping a pebble into a well and hearing the soft plunk far below. He pictured those ripples traveling through him, loosening old knots, making space for something new. He thought about the old way he used to approach life, clinging to what he didn't yet have, measuring his worth by what was missing. How heavy it had felt to carry the constant need to prove, to chase, to earn everything through exhaustion. This new way was softer, but no less powerful. It was like stepping into a river that was already flowing in his direction, instead of trying to push it with his hands. A sound pulled him from his thoughts, the soft thud of mail dropping through the slot in the door. He set the mug down and walked across the room. A thin stack of envelopes lay on the rug, some official-looking, others colorful with handwritten addresses. As he bent to pick them up, he noticed a single envelope at the bottom, cream-colored, with no return address. His name was written in looping handwriting he didn't recognize. He sat back down in the chair, the envelope resting on his lap. He didn't rush to open it. Instead, he let his fingers run over the paper, feeling the faint indentations of the pen. When he finally slid a finger under the flap, the paper opened with a sound that felt almost ceremonial. Inside was a single card, blank, except for one sentence in the same looping hand. What you are waiting for is already on its way. The words landed somewhere deep inside him, not as a surprise, but as confirmation of something he'd been beginning to feel without fully naming. He set the card on the small table beside him, its presence like a quiet lamp in the room. He didn't know who had sent it or why, but he decided it didn't matter. The message itself was enough. He leaned back into the chair, repeating the blessing again, this time letting the words merge with the sentence on the card, as though the two had always belonged together. As the day turned toward evening, he moved through the house in small, unhurried steps. He folded the blanket on the couch, straightened the books on the shelf, rinsed the tea mug in the sink. Every action felt deliberate, infused with a thought. This is the life I'm living, while what I want makes its way to me. The sun began to set, casting a golden wash over the walls. He lit a single candle on the table, watching its flame flicker in the slight draft from the window. Shadows danced across the surface of the journal, the edges of the envelope. The steam still rising from the kettle. He decided to go for a walk. Before night fully fell, pulling on a light jacket, he stepped outside into air that smelled faintly of wet leaves. The street was nearly empty, except for a cat perched on a fence, its tail swaying lazily. He walked slowly, letting his eyes wander over familiar things, as if seeing them for the first time. The curve of the cobblestones under his shoes, the ivy climbing the side of a brick wall, the warm light spilling from a bakery window. Passing the bakery, he caught the scent of fresh bread. It reminded him of mornings from years ago, when he'd stopped there on his way to work, buying a small loaf wrapped in brown paper. Without thinking too much, he stepped inside. The air was warm and fragrant, the shelves lined with loaves and pastries. The woman behind the counter greeted him with a smile, and he returned it easily. "Just this one," he said, pointing to a round loaf with a golden crust. As she wrapped it, she said, "Haven't seen you in a while." He nodded. "I've been walking different paths lately." "Well," she said, handing him the loaf, "sometimes the best things find us when we're not even looking." The words caught him off guard, because they were profound on their own, but because they echoed so perfectly the message on the card. The blessing he'd been repeating, the quiet knowing that had been growing inside him. He thanked her, paid, and stepped back into the cool air, the warm loaf tucked under his arm. By the time he reached home, night had fallen. He placed the bread on the counter, lit 2 more candles, and sliced a piece. The crust cracked gently under the knife, the inside soft and fragrant. Sitting at the table, he took a bite, closing his eyes for a moment to simply taste, and again the blessing rose, not planned, but as natural as breathing. I am open to the goodness that already exists for me. I allow what is mine to find me, without struggle, without resistance. The words seemed to hum in the air around him, blending with the faint sound of the clock in the corner. He knew then that the practice wasn't about waiting for proof to appear, was about living as though it already had. He finished the slice of bread, letting the last bit of warmth linger in his hands from the plate. The card remained on the table beside him, its words visible in the candlelight, and as he rose to blow out the candles before bed, he realized something he hadn't been able to put into words until now. The blessing was no longer something he repeated to make it true, was something he repeated because it already was. He climbed into bed, pulling the blanket up to his chin. Outside, the street was quiet again, save for the faint rustle of wind through the trees. He closed his eyes, letting his breath slow, the blessing still looping softly in his mind as sleep began to gather around him like a second blanket. Somewhere, in that place between waking and dreaming, he felt it's the unmistakable sense that life had already said yes. The morning began with a light that was neither hurried nor shy. It slid into the room like a gentle visitor, brushing its fingertips over the worn wooden floor. The clay cup on the bedside table and the folded blanket at the foot of the bed. He was already awake, sitting on the edge of the mattress, his feet finding the familiar grooves in the floorboards where his toes always rested. His eyes were still soft with sleep, but his mind was clear. The air held a stillness that seemed to be waiting for him to speak. He did not look at the clock. Time had no authority over this ritual. Slowly, he drew a deep breath, letting the air expand his chest before releasing it in a steady stream, as though emptying himself to make room for what was coming. The blessing formed in his mind before it reached his lips. "Everything I need flows to me with ease," he said quietly, not as a demand, but as if he were announcing something already written. His voice was low, yet steady, and as the words left him, he felt the faintest ripple in the air, like a pond disturbed by a single drop. His hands rested loosely on his knees, palms open, not to receive, but to allow. He repeated the blessing again, slower this time, tasting each word, letting the sound of them linger in the space between his heartbeat and the world outside. "Everything I need flows to me with ease." There was no proof of this in the room. Gold coins spilling over the table, no letters promising opportunity, but something in him recognized the truth of it. He had learned that the proof would always be the last to arrive. Belief had to take its seat first. He stood, his movement unhurried, and crossed the small room to open the window. The air outside was cool and held the faint scent of the river. From where he stood, he could see the rooftops of the village sloping gently toward the water, their tiles still dark with night moisture. Birds were beginning their measured conversations, not rushed, not loud, simply certain that their song belonged to the morning. He rested his elbows on the windowsill, repeating the blessing again, now toward the open world. As the words drifted into the waking air, he imagined them carried on invisible threads, weaving themselves into places he could not yet see. Somewhere in the market, a merchant would receive an idea. Somewhere beyond the hills, a stranger would think of his name. Somewhere, the invisible was arranging itself in his favor. He did not push the thought further. He had learned that his task was not to chase, but to align. He dressed with the same attentiveness he gave to speaking the blessing. The shirt he chose was simple, but he smoothed its fabric slowly, as if in doing so, he was smoothing the path ahead of him. His hands moved over each button with care, fastening not just the garment, but his own readiness for the day. The shoes were worn but polished, the soles molded to the shape of his persistence. As he tied the laces, he whispered the blessing again under his breath, letting the rhythm of the knot tie itself to the rhythm of his words. Stepping outside, he was met with the quiet hum of the village beginning its day. A cart rolled past, its wheels creaking in a way that felt like an old song. A woman carrying bread greeted him with a nod, and he responded with a small smile, as though the warmth of her gesture was another form of abundance. He made his way toward the river, each step deliberate, The path curved gently, lined with stones smoothed by years of footsteps. He noticed how the light fell across them, creating patterns that seemed almost intentional. As he walked, his mind repeated not only the blessing, but soft variations of it. Opportunities are already moving toward me. Life is preparing gifts I have not yet seen. The words were not demands. They were acknowledgments of an unseen order already in motion. By the time he reached the riverbank, the sun was higher, glinting off the surface of the water in fragments of gold and silver. He stood there for a long while, listening to the water's slow conversation with itself. Each ripple, each shift in current, reminded him that movement did not have to be hurried to be certain. He spoke the blessing again, feeling the words merge with the steady rhythm of the river. The water did not ask when the next rain would come. It simply carried itself forward. He decided he would do the same. Crossing the small bridge into the marketplace, he noticed details others might overlook. The careful way the fruit seller arranged the ripest pieces at the front, the way the cobbler paused before hammering the next nail, aligning it just so. These were acts of quiet alignment, each one a silent blessing in motion. He felt a quiet certainty that his own blessings were also arranging themselves in unseen places. A man he had never met before stopped him to ask the time. And though the exchange was brief, the stranger's eyes held a flicker of recognition, as if they had met somewhere beyond this morning. He walked on, carrying that small moment like a coin in his pocket, not to spend, but to remember. By midday, the square was alive with sound and color. The scent of spices hung in the air, mingling with the earthy smell of freshly cut wood. He moved slowly among the stalls, not searching for anything in particular, but letting himself be found by what might appear. At one stall, he ran his fingers over a set of handcrafted bowls, their smooth surfaces catching the light. The merchant, an older woman with eyes like polished stone, told him they were made from a tree that grew only near the mountain. He bought one without hesitation, not because he needed it, but because something in him understood that saying yes to small beauty is a way of opening the door to greater beauty. He carried the bowl back toward the river, stopping in the shade of an old willow. Sitting on the grass, he placed the bowl before him and repeated the blessing once more. Everything I need flows to me with ease. He imagined the bowl filling slowly, not with food or coins, but with moments, connections, and quiet confirmations that he was in step with the life he was calling to himself. He closed his eyes and let the sound settle over him, as if each chime were a reminder that timing was always working in his favor. As the afternoon leaned toward evening, the colors of the sky softened. He walked home slowly, each step an unspoken thank you. In the quiet of his room, he placed the bowl on the table where it caught the last light of the day. He sat beside it, hands resting on the surface of the wood, feeling the grain beneath his fingers. He repeated the blessing one final time for the day, not out of duty, but out of quiet joy. The proof had not yet arrived, but the certainty had done for him. That was more than enough. Night arrived like a guest who knew how to enter without disturbing the room. The air was cooler now, and the last threads of golden light lingered along the horizon. Reluctant to leave, he sat at his small wooden table, the handcrafted bowl from the market before him. Still empty in the physical sense, but carrying a quiet fullness only he could feel. The single candle flickered, casting shadows that swayed gently across the walls. He rested his hands on the table, palms down this time, feeling the grain of the wood and the slight unevenness that spoke of human hands shaping it. The blessing rose again within him, unhurried, as though it had been sitting in the room waiting for him to notice. "Everything I need flows to me with ease," he whispered, letting the candlelight witness the words. He did not force emotion into the sentence. Instead, he allowed it to be simple, clean, and clear like water. He leaned back, closing his eyes, listening to the distant sounds of the village settling in for the night. Somewhere, a door closed softly, a cartwheel creaked. Laughter floated faintly through the cool air from a nearby courtyard. Each sound was a reminder that life was continuing its rhythm, carrying both him and the unseen blessings forward. He thought about the conversations he'd had that day, the subtle exchanges that might not yet reveal their meaning. He remembered the stranger asking for the time, the merchant with the polished stone eyes, the way the river had seemed to mirror his own patience. These were small pieces of something larger, like pages from a book he hadn't yet finished reading. When he finally stood, it was to prepare for sleep with the same quiet precision he used in the morning. The act of folding his clothes became a gesture of respect for the day just lived and for the day yet to arrive. He brushed the dust from his shoes before setting them neatly by the door, as though clearing the path for tomorrow. The bed was simple, yet welcoming, the blanket smelling faintly of sun from its time drying earlier in the week. As he lay down, the coolness of the pillow met his cheek, and he turned his face toward the window, where the stars had begun to appear. He spoke the blessing again, softer now, letting the words dissolve into the dark. "Everything I need flows to me with ease." He imagined the words leaving his lips like small lanterns, drifting upward into the night, their light barely visible, yet entirely certain in their direction. The stars above did not question their place. They simply shone. He thought of that as he drifted towards sleep, the quiet certainty of things that simply are. The dream came without a clear beginning. He found himself standing in an open field, the grass swaying in a breeze he could not feel. Ahead of him was a path lined with stones, each one carved with a single word he could not yet read. He walked slowly, sensing that each step mattered. As he approached the first stone, the word revealed itself. Trust. The second stone read, allow. The third, receive. He realized this was not just a path, was a teaching. The dream seemed to place him between the known and the unknown, urging him to move forward without rushing. At the end of the path stood a clock, tall and old, with hands that moved so slowly they seemed almost still. Its ticking was deep, resonant, like the heartbeat of the earth itself. As he drew closer, he noticed something strange. The hands of the clock advanced only when he felt a wave of ease wash over him. When his thoughts tightened, the hands froze. When his breath softened, the ticking resumed. He understood then abundance moved at the pace of his own alignment. No force, no strain, only allowing. He woke just before dawn, the dream's clarity still fresh in his mind. He lay still, letting the feeling settle into him before moving. The room was quiet, but he could hear a faint chorus of early birds beginning their day. Slowly, he sat. Up, feet finding the same grooves in the floor as always. The blessing came naturally, not from memory, but from recognition. Everything I need flows to me with ease. The dream had not been a message to decode. It had been a mirror of what he was already living. He rose, dressed, and stepped outside into the soft light of early morning. The village was still wrapped in silence, but the air carried the promise of movement. As he walked toward the river, he noticed a small envelope resting against his doorframe. There was no name, no seal, only a single line written across the front, "For your keeping." Inside was a pressed flower-white petals, a gold center, delicate yet preserved. He did not know who had left it, but he understood what it meant. Evidence was beginning to appear, and it often arrived quietly at the river. The water seemed more luminous than usual, as if reflecting not just the sky, but the alignment he carried. Within, he spoke the blessing again, letting his voice blend with a low hum of the current. Each word felt like it was traveling farther now, carried downstream into places where unseen arrangements were already forming. He could almost feel the movement opportunities adjusting themselves. People remembering his name, paths clearing before he even thought to walk them. When he returned to the marketplace later that day, the same merchant from before greeted him warmly, placing a small cloth pouch in his hand. "For you," she said simply. Inside was a carved wooden charm in the shape of a key. He turned it over in his fingers, feeling the smoothness of the wood, the weight of the gift. He thanked her, and as he walked away, he realized the key was not for any lock he knew, was for doors he had yet to find. That night, as the candlelight once again filled his small room, he placed the pressed flower and the key beside the bowl on the table. 3 objects now sat there, each one a quiet testament to the truth he had been repeating for so long. He did not yet know how they would connect, but he knew they already did. He whispered the blessing once more, a smile in his voice. "Everything I need flows to me with ease." And somewhere beyond what he could see, the next piece was already on its way. The morning began before the light fully claimed the sky. A pale silver-blue glow rested on the horizon, hinting at the day to come. He woke without haste, eyes opening to the gentle shadows on the walls of his small, modest room. For a moment, he lay still, breathing in the cool air that drifted in from a slightly open window. The scent was clean, carrying traces of damp earth and the faint sweetness of early blossoms somewhere unseen. His fingers moved slowly across the blanket, feeling its textured weave, reminding himself that awareness of small things often carried the greatest shift. He sat up, allowing his feet to find the familiar spots on the wooden floor where the boards dipped slightly. He stood, stretching his arms overhead until his spine lengthened, then rolled his shoulders, feeling each joint loosen in sequence. Moving deliberately, he crossed to the window and pushed it open wider. A crisp current of air filled the room, lifting the ends of the curtain in a slow, rhythmic sway. The village below was still half asleep, only the faintest movements of a few early risers could be seen. He closed his eyes and spoke the blessing as naturally as breathing. "Everything I need flows to me with ease." His voice was low, carrying no urgency, no grasping, only a steady certainty, as though he were speaking of the sunrise itself. The words felt warm as they left him, spreading through his chest like a gentle tide. He let them linger in the space between thoughts, not rushing into what they might mean or demand. He moved to the table where the three objects lay: the carved wooden key, the pressed white flower, and the handcrafted bowl. His fingers hovered over them, not to choose, but to acknowledge. He had learned that touching them was not necessary to feel their connection to something larger. Still, today he picked up the key, holding it flat in his palm as if weighing possibility itself. He wondered what invisible doors it had already opened without his knowing. The ritual of the morning continued, each action deliberate. He washed his face in the small basin by the wall, the cool water sending ripples of wakefulness through him. He dried his face with a cloth hanging nearby, then brushed his hair back with his fingers, leaving it as it fell naturally. Today's shirt was the same soft linen one he favored for comfort, slightly faded from years of wear. Pulling it over his head, he thought about how ease often came from the familiar, but abundance required a willingness to welcome the unfamiliar as well. Stepping outside, he let his eyes adjust to the widening daylight. The cobblestones were still damp from last night's rain, reflecting fragments of the sky. He began walking toward the river, feeling the rhythm of his steps match the soft beating of his heart. Along the way, he greeted the baker who was just pulling open the shutters of his shop. The smell of warm bread drifted toward him, earthy and comforting. Without planning it, he found himself stopping to help a woman gather fallen fruit from a small cart that had tipped. Her gratitude was quiet but sincere, her eyes softening as she pressed a ripe pear into his hand. "For you," she said, before moving on. He placed it gently into the pocket of his linen shirt at the river. The water seemed to hold a different kind of light today, one that shimmered even when the surface was still. He knelt, resting his hands on his knees, and repeated the blessing again, letting it merge with a low murmur of the current. "Everything I need flows to me with ease." In the quiet that followed, he imagined the river carrying those words far beyond the horizon, into places and moments he would never see, yet somehow already touched. As he walked back through the village, he noticed small changes: a door freshly painted a deep green, a new bundle of flowers tied to a neighbor's gate, a child practicing balancing on a low wall. Each detail seemed to carry its own quiet invitation to notice that life was always arranging itself in ways aligned with what was most welcomed by midday. He found himself in the marketplace again. The merchant who had given him the wooden key waved him over with a knowing smile. She held out a small folded paper sealed with wax. "You'll know when to open it," she said. He didn't ask questions. Hearsay could wait. He slipped it into the same pocket as the pear. The weight of the two objects together felt symbolic, though he couldn't yet say how. The afternoon sun drew long shadows across the streets, and he decided to take the winding path up to the hill, overlooking the village. The climb was slow but steady, each step deliberate. At the top, the view unfolded fields in varying shades of green and gold, the river tracing a silver line toward the distant hills. He sat on a smooth rock, pulling the pear from his pocket. As he ate it, the sweetness seemed amplified, not by hunger but by the unplanned nature of the gift. After some time, he reached into his pocket and drew out the folded paper. The wax seal cracked softly between his fingers. Inside was a single sentence written in a hand both elegant and steady. You are already standing where your blessings arrive. He read it twice, then let the words rest in him. The paper went back into his pocket, but the sentence stayed closer, settling into that quiet, wordless space that recognized truth before the mind could argue. Evening came gently. He returned home, the candle waiting to be lit on his table. He placed the paper alongside the bowl, the flower, and the key, noticing how the arrangement felt complete, even if it wasn't finished. Lighting the candle, he let the flames glow, fill the small room. Sitting in the wooden chair, he spoke the blessing once more, this time with a slow exhale afterward. Everything I need flows to me with ease. And somewhere, far beyond, the visible edges of his life, the truth of those words was already unfolding. The night deepened quietly, as if the village itself were exhaling after a long day. Inside his small home, the candle on the table burned low, its light pooling in a golden circle. The man sat still, watching the flame dance in slow arcs. There was no rush to extinguish it. He had come to understand that certain things, like blessings, could not be hurried. When the wax finally sank low enough to gutter, he leaned forward and gently pinched the flame out. The room returned to the soft darkness, broken only by the faint glow of the moon spilling through the open window. He stood, his body moving in a slow, practiced rhythm as he prepared for sleep, each gesture folding the linen shirt neatly over the chair, pouring a small glass of water, for the night was done, as if it mattered deeply. Not for the action itself, but for the attention it carried. Lying down, he pulled the thin blanket over his chest and let his breathing lengthen. Thoughts drifted through, some about the day, some about the small, unexplainable moments that seemed to follow his morning blessing. He let them pass like clouds. His last thought before sleep was a silent repetition. Everything I need flows to me with ease. The morning arrived softly. A faint warmth on his cheek told him the sun had risen before he opened his eyes. He stretched, feeling the way his muscles lengthened in sequence, his toes pressing lightly against the blanket's weave. Standing, he let his bare feet touch the cool boards again, grounding himself before moving toward the window. The air smelled faintly of rain, though the sky was clear. Somewhere, the scent of bread baking carried through the streets, mingling with the crispness of early air. He rested both hands on the windowsill and looked out over the rooftops. The world felt both the same and subtly rearranged, as if overnight some unseen current had shifted in his favor. He spoke the blessing aloud again. Everything I need flows to me with ease. The words fell into the air without strain, like seeds on a gentle breeze. This time, after speaking, he lingered at the window longer than usual. A bird landed on the ledge beside him, a small sparrow, feathers streaked with brown and cream. It tilted its head at him for a moment, then hopped once and flew away. He smiled faintly, aware that sometimes the smallest interruptions carried the greatest meaning. Breakfast was simple: warm tea and the last piece of bread from yesterday, softened slightly by steam. As he ate, he considered the folded paper again. The one with a message: "You are already standing where your blessings arrive." He didn't read it again. He didn't need to. The words had already carved themselves into his quiet understanding. The day unfolded without haste. He walked toward the edge of the village, following a path lined with tall grasses swaying in the breeze. The sound was soothing, like 1,000 whispers moving in unison. Halfway down the path, he stopped. There was nothing visibly different, yet he felt it a pull, subtle but insistent, as if the ground beneath him remembered something he had not yet lived. He closed his eyes and let the feeling expand. In that stillness, an image came not as a vision, but as a knowing. He saw himself receiving something, though he couldn't tell what. The sensation wasn't urgency, it was inevitability. He whispered the blessing under his breath, almost as if speaking to the earth itself. Everything I need flows to me with ease. By midday, he returned to the marketplace. This time, he noticed a small wooden stall near the edge, one he had never seen before. An elderly man stood behind it, arranging objects on a cloth. Some were polished stones, others small hand-carved figures. One, in particular, caught his eye: a small clock, barely larger than his palm, its hands frozen at the hour just before noon. He picked it up, feeling its unexpected weight. "It doesn't move," the old man said, his voice low but steady. "Not until you are ready." The man looked at him with a strange mixture of warmth and certainty, as if the words were less instruction and more prophecy. He asked the price, but the seller only shook his head. "It finds its owner. Take it." He placed the clock in his pocket beside the folded paper. Again, the weight of both felt deliberate, as if each carried part of the same message. That evening, as the sun lowered and painted the sky in soft shades of apricot and lavender, he sat on the small bench outside his home. He held the clock in one hand, the paper in the other. Slowly, he began to notice a faint tick, so faint it was almost imagined. Each sound seemed to pulse with the same rhythm as his breathing. He realized the clock wasn't measuring time. At all, it was measuring alignment. From that night forward, his blessing took on a deeper layer. "Everything I need flows to me with ease," he said each morning. And now he imagined the clock ticking in response, each movement drawing invisible opportunities closer. Days became weeks. Some mornings, the clock remained still. On others, he would hear that faint tick again, often followed by small, serendipitous moments, a conversation that led to unexpected help, a gift from a stranger, a door opening where none had been. He stopped questioning the pattern. He began to understand that alignment wasn't about forcing conditions to change. It was about letting his own state of being shift until life could meet him there. One night, after lighting the candle and placing the clock beside it, he whispered, not only the blessing, but also something more, something that had been forming quietly inside him. "I am always in the right place at the right time." The words felt as true as the moonlight spilling across the table, and somewhere beyond the reach of proof or logic, the universe kept rearranging itself, not because he demanded it, but because he had learned to let it. Before we drift into our next story, I want to ask you something. Are you still awake? If you are, leave a comment below and tell me the exact time you're watching this video, and maybe even share what's passing through your mind right now. I'd love to read it. All right, now let's gently step into our next story. The evening did not arrive so much as it settled, like a soft shawl laid over the shoulders of the village. Lamps winked on one by one along the lane, each a small golden circle on stone, and the air cooled enough to remind the skin it was alive. He reached a bend where the cobbles always held a little more dampness than the rest, slowing his steps. Without thinking, listening to the rhythm of leather against stone, hand in his pocket around the old house key he never needed to look at to use. His life had learned a pace that wasn't slow so much as considerate. He let it guide him home. His door was the color of tea with milk, the paint worn smooth at the height where knuckles had knocked for years. Tonight, as he came close, he noticed a small parcel resting neatly against the threshold. A keno, not delivered. By the post, there was no stamp, no string, no name. Just a box the size of a folded palm, wrapped in craft paper that looked hand-cut. The edges clean, but not machine straight, as if care had done the work rather than haste. He crouched, feeling his knees answer with their usual quiet creak, and lifted the parcel. It weighed more than it looked, not heavy, but purposeful. He held it a moment longer than necessary, an instinct to read the air around it, then rose, slid the familiar key into the familiar lock, and turned. The latch agreed with him. The door gave its little sigh of release. Inside, the room greeted him with its evening perfume, a hint of cedar from the bookshelf, soap from the clean cup upside down on the drying towel, a ribbon of last light thrown across a table. He set the parcel in the center of that light and washed his hands as if preparing to meet a guest. Warm water, a circle over each knuckle, a pass along the thumb, a small shake to let the drops fall into the basin. He dried with a linen towel that knew its job. Then he sat, pulled the chair in until the front edge pressed lightly against his thighs, and drew the parcel toward him. There was no tape to fight, only paper folded in a way that wanted to be unfolded. He lifted one corner, then the next, and the paper opened like a breath. A small wooden box lay inside dark walnut, corners joined with tiny dovetails, a lid carved with a pattern that looked simple from far away and complicated close up. He ran a fingertip over the grooves. The pattern changed as he looked, not in shape, but in meaning, like those designs that can be a vase or two faces, depending on how your mind decides to see. He smiled, and the box answered by being exactly what it had been a moment before. He eased the lid back. Inside, on a bed of pale felt, rested a key. It was older than anything else in the room, and younger than his need. Brass, he thought at first, but when he tilted it, he saw deeper tones, honey, olive, even a suggestion of blue, near the bow where time gathers in the low places. Symbols rode the shank, not letters, not numbers, but little shapes that suggested both at once. The bit was cut with an elegance that made him feel a craftsman somewhere had once been very proud. He lifted it and found it warmer than the room, as if it had kept a little of the day inside itself. Under the felt lay a card. He slid it free with the care you give to thin things that carry thick meanings. One sentence, printed in ink, the color of old tea. It opens only what you have already unlocked within. He read it again without trying to understand. He let it sit in him like a seed, not asked to sprout yet. He turned the key in his hand so the symbols caught the lamplight, and for a moment he felt something like a tone inside his chest, pitch you don't hear so much as discover that your ribs agree with. He breathed once, fuller. When I soften, doors softened with me. A thought arrived, unannounced, and yet not a stranger. He stood and walked the room as one does when measuring new space. The front door. He turned, considered, smiled at the plain lock that had never failed him. The cupboard, the wardrobe. He tried none of them. The card's sentence had stitched itself across his attention. Not a puzzle to solve. A posture, too. Try on. He placed the key on the table and lit the lamp to a warmer glow. The wood gathered the light greedily and gave it back with interest. He put the kettle on, the flame a blue crown holding up the bottom of the pot, and leaned against the counter, feeling the tile cool through the fabric of his sleeve. The water thickened in sound, from thin to round to almost boil. He poured over a spoon of leaves, watched the color drift like smoke, and covered the cup with its saucer to let heat and herb talk in private. While it steeped, he returned to the table and brought the key closer. He held it with the bow cradled in his left hand, the bit resting along the fingers of his right. He closed his eyes and tested an idea. Maybe the key had a weight in more than one way. He pictured a door, not here, not now a door. He knew, not because he'd seen it, but because the knowing of it had followed him through years like a shadow at noon. The door stood at the top of a stair, paint the color of dusk, just before the first star. There was a trace of gold along the panels, not decoration. More like a memory of light that had touched it habitually. He breathed into the picture. The door felt not locked, but unready, not resisting waiting. He softened his jaw, let his shoulders drop back and down, and took one longer exhale. In his palm, the key warmed another degree, or he thought it did, which for such things is the same. The kettle clicked as it settled into not boiling. He took that as permission, returned to the counter, lifted the saucer, and inhaled the steam. Chamomile and a little orange peel. He brought the cup to the table, set it left of the key, and sat again. He did not reach for the card this time. He reached for the feeling that the card had been written for. Okay. It did not come like thunder. Okay. It came like the moment a sleeper chooses to wake. I allow what is mine to meet me where I already am. The sentence wasn't his usual blessing, but it had its flavor. He let it pass through him once, twice. On the third pass, it felt less like something he was telling the world, and more like something the world had been trying to tell him. He ate a simple supper bread, olive oil, a tomato he sliced with more care than a tomato usually receives. He salted it at the last moment, not out of discipline, but because the last moment is where tiny mercies taste best. He moved slowly, leaving space between gestures, as if listening for a knock he wasn't sure was coming. It didn't come. It didn't need to. The key lay where he had put it, patient as rain standing in the air before it remembers how to fall. Later, he washed the plate and the knife, dried them, and laid them in their place. He wiped the table with a cloth that knew the path its hand would take. He set the wooden box on the shelf next to the books about boats he'd never sail and cities he might visit anyway. The key he did not return to the box. He chose the small dish where he kept things that resisted categorization, a smooth stone from a river he crossed as a boy, a button from a coat he never owned, a ticket stub to a play where the line he remembered best wasn't spoken but implied. He set the key there, and it looked right. Some objects throw a little light, some objects catch it. This one did both. Before sleep, he wrote the card sentence on the inside back cover of his journal. He did it in his smallest hand, one careful letter after another, like laying stones in a path. He closed the book and slid it under the pillow, not for superstition, but because ideas sometimes like to sit close to the places where our heads meet the night. In bed, the sheets cool became warm, the pillow learned the shape of his ear, and the room settled into the kind of quiet that doesn't need to be defended. He did not ask for dreams. He did not push them away. He turned onto his side. The darkness on the ceiling learned the pattern of the curtain. Breath, breath, a space between. The place where choices are born. He was in a hallway he did not recognize that felt more like him than rooms he had known for years. The floor held the color of oiled walnut. The walls wore a paint that might have been white if you'd never seen sunlight. Doors lined the hall at exact intervals, each a different color that had once been a fruit or a storm or a seasoned pomegranate red, storm blue, late apricot, first frost gray. No labels, no locks he could see. He stood and did not move until his breath made a circle of ease around him. Then he took the key from his pocket dreams. Our generous with pocket sand waited. A door to his right regarded him, the way a cat regards a person who knows how to listen. He knew without knowing why that behind it lived a version of his workday that felt like water climbing stairs, not impossible, just not what water prefers. He smiled at the door knot, unkindly, and let it be. Another door ahead smelled like rain on stones that have stories. That one pulled at him. He did not hurry. He walked until the distance between what he felt and where he stood was the size of a breath. He placed his hand where a lock should be, warm. He shaped a thought with the care of someone folding paper to hold. A gift. I am at home in what I'm asking for. He turned the key where no keyhole was, and the door understood. On the other side, space that did not argue with him. A high window offering a square of sky. A table that would never wobble. A chair that let a spine remember what it had been designed for. He stepped in and heard nothing except the dignified hum of being welcomed. He looked down. The key had become lighter, or his hand had. The room contained no treasure, and yet he felt richer by the weight he had set down without noticing. He woke before dawn with a taste of that room still on his tongue, a flavor of clean wood and permission. He lay still and let the feeling fill the shape his body made in the bed. The window began to admit the early gray that teaches color how to be gentle. He slid the journal from under the pillow, opened to the back cover, touched the sentence he had written, and smiled at how it felt truer for having been carried through sleep. He sat, let his feet find the floor, and breathed until breath found him back. At the table, the key waited where he'd left it. He did not pick it up yet. He spoke his morning words, the ones that had taught his mouth to love simple truths. Everything I need meets me where I am. I let my doors feel me coming and open gladly. The language shifted a little each day. The meaning did not. He poured water into the kettle, set it on its blue crown, and watched his reflection in the window become brighter by increments. When the tea was ready, he carried the cup to the table and finally lifted the key. It warmed more quickly now, as if it had learned his temperature and was happy to meet him halfway. He closed his eyes and chose a door knot, a real one yet, a door of work that did not wear him down to prove it had been done. He did not see it so much as agree to it. Something in his chest eased, as if a hand had unclenched without being asked to. He opened his eyes and laughed softly at nothing in particular. Then he put on his shoes. Outside, early birds were writing first drafts on wires. The lane carried a thin breath of yeast and cinnamon from the bakery. He walked past his usual left turn and took the right that led toward the old warehouse district, the one with brick facades like faces that had seen a great deal and remembered only what had helped them grow kind. He did not intend to go there. His feet were voting before his mind held an election. He let them. At the edge of the district, he stopped. The building he faced had a door he had never noticed storm blue, a memory of gold along the panels. He did not pretend surprise. He let delight arrive and make itself comfortable. He walked the last 5 steps as one does when approaching something sacred and ordinary at once. He stood with his palm on the wood, felt the temperature of the day held there, and waited until his breath and the surface found the same tempo. Then, and only then, he brought the key forward. There was no keyhole. He smiled. He softened his jaw. He remembered the feeling from the night. I am at home in what I'm asking for. The wood under his palm grew warmer, or his hand did. He lifted the key and turned it lightly in the air, as though turning a thought, until it caught the light. The door answered with the faintest inward give, the way a friend gives when you reach for a hug you've both been missing. He pressed, not hard. The door moved. Inside, not a warehouse exactly. A room with the character of things that have waited, without sulking. Dust that had the courtesy to lie in corners, not on surfaces. Sunlight drawn in long rectangles across a floor that wanted to be stepped on. He entered, and the air rearranged itself politely to make room. His shoulders dropped. A centimeter. The breath he didn't know he'd been guarding exhaled. He walked the perimeter, slowly, tracing with his eyes the line where brick met beam, beam met ceiling, ceiling met skylight. In the far wall, a second door. He approached it, not to open, only to notice it was the color of late apricot, the kind that happens to the sky once a season when it has something tender to say. He did not reach for it. He turned instead and stood at the center of the room. "Thank you," he said aloud. Not to the room, exactly, to the part of himself that had learned how to let the room happen. The key in his hand felt less like an object now, and more like a verb. He stayed until the light had advanced 3 floorboards, and the sounds from the lane had matured from sparrows to voices. Then he stepped back out, drew the door gently to, and placed his palm against the wood for one more breath. Like leaving a note you don't need to write. On the walk home, nothing was different, and everything was. The same dog regarded him from the same stoop, but today the dog's ears made a shape that looked like welcome. The same puddle reflected the same sky, but the sky held a softness he hadn't earned and didn't need to. Back in his kitchen, he washed his hands again, brewed another cup, and sat with the key on the table between them, like a guest he was learning to understand. He brought the card from the box and set it beside the cup. The sentence no longer invited questions. Invited practice. It opens only what you have already unlocked within. He nodded once. All right, he said, and the room believed him. It began on a morning so still that even the air seemed to be listening. The faintest glow of dawn stretched lazily across the horizon, painting the distant hills in pale gold. The man awoke slowly, not because he had been dreaming vividly, but because the quietness itself had nudged him from sleep. For a long moment he remained lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, watching the subtle dance of shadows cast by the gentle swaying of the curtains. It was one of those moments where nothing seemed to demand action, and yet something deep within him whispered that the day ahead would be unlike any other. His bare feet touched the cool wooden floor. The sensation grounded him instantly, reminding him of the now, of the exact space he occupied in the world. He padded toward the small kitchen, the faint scent of last night's chamomile tea still lingering in the air. On the table lay an envelope, one he was certain hadn't been there when he'd gone to bed. It was cream-colored, its edges slightly rough, as though it had traveled far. He hesitated before touching it, running his fingertips lightly over its surface. The paper felt warm, strangely so, as if it had been sitting in sunlight, though the morning light had barely touched his window. There was no stamp, no address, only a small embossed symbol on the seal, a simple outline of a key. He broke the seal slowly, as though peeling back a veil to something sacred. And inside, wrapped in thin parchment, was a key unlike any he had I ever seen. It wasn't made of brass or steel, but of some other material, shimmering faintly between silver and gold depending on how it caught the light. Its bow was circular, smooth, almost mirror-like, and in its reflection he could see not just his face, but fleeting images, a coastline he didn't recognize, a room filled with unfamiliar books, a staircase spiraling into shadow. Each image appeared for just a heartbeat, then dissolved into the next. Beneath the key lay a small card with handwriting so fluid it seemed alive. This key opens every door you truly open first in your mind. The rest is a matter of trust. He sat down, slowly, the weight of the object resting in his palm heavier than it appeared. For several minutes, he simply stared at it, listening to the soft hum it seemed to emit, not in sound, but in feeling, a vibration, low and steady, pulsing in rhythm with his heartbeat. He remembered something, not from a book or a conversation, but from somewhere older, deeper. Nothing comes unless you first allow it inside you. He didn't know why this thought came, but it anchored itself firmly in his awareness. He turned the key over, feeling the grooves along its shaft, the small imperfections that made it unique. He stood to the front door of his home and instinctively placed the key into the lock. It fit perfectly, but when he turned it, nothing happened. No satisfying click, no change in the world. He pulled it out, looking at it again, and the card's words echoed in his mind. Only if you first open it in your mind. So he closed his eyes. He imagined the door, not as it was, but as it could be. He pictured stepping through it into a space he longed to see, a warm room bathed in golden light, filled with scents of cedar and cinnamon, shelves lined with books whose spines bore his name, symbols of work he had not yet done but already felt as though he had completed. In the vision, he felt gratitude, not for something to come, but for something that already existed in the fabric of possibility. When he opened his eyes, the air seemed denser, charged. He placed the key back into the lock and turned it. This time, there was a soft click. The door opened not to the street outside, but to a long corridor he had never seen before. It was lined with countless doors, each different in color, shape, and size. Some gleamed like polished marble. Others looked as if they were made from rough bark. The floor beneath him shimmered faintly, as though he were walking on the edge of a dream. He took a slow step forward, the sound of his footfall echoing softly. The corridor had no visible end, stretching far beyond where his eyes could follow. In the distance, he could hear faint music. Not a melody he knew, but one that felt familiar in his chest, as if it were the rhythm of his own heartbeat made audible. His hand tightened around the key. He realized then that this was not a gift to be used thoughtlessly. Each door, each possibility, required him to become the version of himself who had already stepped through. The key would not open for the man he was. By habit, it would open for the man he chose to be in thought, in emotion, in belief. He remembered another quiet truth. What you feel is a signal. The key listens to your feeling. He took a deep breath and walked further into the corridor. The next morning arrived, wrapped in the soft haze of dawn, a faint golden mist stretching lazily over the quiet town. He awoke slowly, as though surfacing from a dream that had left an echo in his chest. The silver key lay on the nightstand, catching the first light like a drop of moon suspended in midair. He sat up, bare feet brushing the cool wooden floor, and let his fingers hover over it for a moment before picking it up. It felt warmer than the room should allow, as if it had been holding onto the memory of his hand from the night before. He closed his eyes and allowed himself to imagine a door knot. Just any door, but one that meant something. He pictured the grain of the wood, the glint of the handle, the faint weight of the air on the other side. His mind lingered there, building it piece by piece, until it was no longer a vague image, but a place so real that he could almost smell the scent of what waited beyond. A thought rose inside him. When I can see it clearly, I am already halfway. There, he dressed without haste, every movement deliberate, as though preparing himself not for an errand, but for a ceremony. The streets were still empty, the light still gentle. He walked to a part of town he hadn't visited in years, a street lined with old buildings whose facades whispered stories of forgotten times. There, nestled between a closed bakery and a shop selling dusty antiques, was a narrow green door. He didn't know why his mind had chosen this one. Maybe it had been lodged in his memory all these years, but as he stood in front of it, the details matched exactly what he had imagined. Earlier, he reached into his pocket, feeling the weight of the key against his palm, but before he tried to unlock it, he paused. The key, he had learned, didn't respond to haste. It waited for the mind to align, for belief to solidify like the final turn of a puzzle piece. He placed his hand on the door and whispered a thought that came unbidden. I allow the good I seek to find me. It's already mine, in essence. The tension in his chest loosened. He felt the quiet hum inside him, a vibration that seemed to travel from his chest to the metal in his hand. Only then did he slide the key into the lock. It turned with a sound so soft it might have been a sigh, and the door gave way. The air inside was warmer, filled with a scent of cedar and something faintly sweet, like oranges resting in the sun. The room was not grand, but it was alive, in a way that defied logic. On a table in the center, there was a small wooden box, unmarked, simple, yet somehow glowing in the dim light. He approached slowly, each step measured, the sound of the floorboards grounding him. He placed his hand over the box, feeling its quiet pulse. When he opened it, he found not gold, not jewels, but a folded piece of paper. He unfolded it carefully, the paper crackling slightly, and read the words written in an elegant hand. Every door you open here must first be opened in here. The last here was underlined, and he realized it didn't mean the physical room, it meant his mind. He sat in the single chair by the table, letting the words settle in him like seeds. His mind wandered to possibilities. What if each door held not objects, but pieces of himself, paths that only belief could illuminate? He thought about the moments in his life where he had hesitated, waiting for proof before moving forward. The key seemed to whisper the opposite, that proof followed belief, never the other way around. The room felt safe, like it was holding him in a quiet embrace. He let his eyes drift shut, not asleep, but somewhere between waking and dreaming. In that space, thoughts began to rise naturally. I trust the unseen as much as the seen. I am ready for the doors I have imagined. Every step I take is toward something that already belongs to me. They weren't forced. They felt as though they belonged to the air itself, passing through him as much as from him. After what could have been minutes or hours, he stood again. The box was empty now, the paper gone. Perhaps it had dissolved. Perhaps it had never been meant to stay. He stepped back into the street. Sunlight, sharper now, voices beginning to fill the morning air. But something had shifted, he noticed. The way people's eyes lingered on him for a second longer. The way a shopkeeper waved, though they'd never spoken before. It was as though the world had caught a hint of the alignment he carried. He continued walking, the key heavier in his pocket, but not in a burdensome way, more like a reminder. He knew there would be other doors, and with each one, the real challenge would not be the lock, but the mind that approached it. And as he turned the corner toward the market, his steps felt lighter. Somewhere deep within, a steady rhythm pulsed in time with his thoughts. Every door is already mine when I choose to. See it as open. The market was alive in full color by the time he arrived, though his mind was still tethered to the quiet warmth of the room he had just left. Stalls overflowed with fruit in shades so vivid they almost glowed, oranges with pores like tiny suns, deep red apples with a sheen like polished glass, bunches of grapes heavy enough to bend their vines. The scent of baked bread drifted through the air, weaving through the melody of clinking coins, merchants calling out their morning greetings, and the soft rustle of fabric as shoppers moved past one another. He walked without rushing, letting his senses drink in the abundance around him. It struck him that the market was a reflection of the key's lesson. Each stall was like a door, holding its own potential. Some he passed without stopping, not because they lacked value, but because he wasn't drawn to them in this moment. Others pulled at him, not with logic, but with a quiet knowing that felt deeper than choice. He stopped at a stand where an elderly woman sold jars of honey. The jars caught the sunlight, sending golden reflections dancing across the table. She didn't speak at first, only smiled, as if she knew he was meant to be there. He picked up a jar and noticed something strange. Inside, suspended in the thick amber, was a small brass charm, shaped like a key. It was no bigger than his thumb, and yet it seemed to hum faintly in his palm. He looked at the woman, who met his eyes with a gaze so steady, it felt like she could see right through the layers of his thoughts. "Some doors," she said softly, "don't open from the outside. You must sweeten the inside first." The words landed in him like the paper in the wooden box. Earlier, he bought the jar, slipping it carefully into his bag. As he continued walking, he thought about her words. How often had he tried to force something to open opportunities, relationships, ideas, without tending to the beliefs that shaped them? The sweetness had to come first, the warmth of inner readiness. He could almost feel it now. I prepare the inside of my life for what I want to welcome. The outside will follow in perfect time. Further down the market, he came across a musician playing a slow, lilting tune on a violin. The melody seemed to stretch the space between moments, making everything around it move softer, slower. People dropped coins into his open case, but the musician's eyes were closed, his entire focus on the song. As the man listened, he realized that the music was like the act of imagining a door. It was creating a space that others could step into. Not everyone would notice, but those who did would feel it. That was the quiet power of alignment. It didn't demand, it invited. The sun climbed higher, and he began making his way toward the quieter streets beyond the market. His path took him past a row of tall, weathered buildings with balconies dressed in hanging plants. At the very end of the row, partially hidden by the drooping leaves of a fig tree, was another door. This one was narrow, painted deep blue, with flecks of gold peeking through where the paint had worn away. Without thinking, he reached for the key in his pocket, but stopped, his hand resting just above it. He closed his eyes and breathed in slowly, letting his mind shape the inside of this door before he even touched it. He imagined warmth, light, spilling through tall windows, the smell of fresh bread and herbs, the sound of pages turning in the quiet. He imagined a space where ideas lived freely, where his thoughts felt at home. In that stillness, a whisper rose. "You can only walk into what you've already walked into in here." He tapped his chest lightly, smiling at the realization when he slid the key into the lock. It turned effortlessly. The door opened into a sunlit kitchen, where a kettle whistled gently on the stove. No one was there, yet the table was set for one, with a plate of fresh bread and a steaming cup of tea. He stepped inside, the floor cool under his feet, and sat down. The bread was warm, the tea fragrant with mint and something floral. There was no note, no explanation, only the quiet assurance that he had been expected. He ate slowly, feeling the fullness of the moment, as if each bite was proof of something he couldn't quite name. Perhaps it was this: the universe was not a place of locked doors, but of doors waiting for minds willing to imagine them open. And as he finished his tea, the thoughts settled deeper into him. Every good thing is already prepared for me. My only task is to be ready to receive it. The morning after the blue door and its waiting table. He woke with a taste of mint tea still lingering in his memory, though his tongue could not find it. Sunlight filtered through the sheer curtains of his small room, painting the walls with pale gold. He lay still for a moment, listening to the slow rhythm of the town awakening outside, the faint clink of dishes from a neighbor's kitchen, the muted creak of cartwheels on cobblestone, a distant gull's cry riding the wind. He turned toward the wooden box on his table. The key inside lay quiet, yet its presence seemed to hum in his awareness. He reached for it, holding it lightly in his palm, and whispered without meaning to, "Every door I seek already exists for me. I only need to see it open here first." His free hand touched his chest, grounding the thought into his body as if it were a truth older than his own name. He dressed slowly, buttoning his shirt with deliberate care. Each movement was a small ritual, a way of choosing presence over haste. The air smelled faintly of bread baking somewhere nearby, and his stomach reminded him that he hadn't eaten since the bread and tea the day before. He stepped outside, the day already stretching before him like a long, unrolled path. His feet carried him toward the hills beyond the town, where a narrow trail wound between olive groves. The leaves shimmered silver in the light, their undersides catching the breeze like fish scales in shallow water. He paused at the edge of the grove, watching a farmer shake one of the branches until olives rained down into a wide net. The man looked up, nodded once, and returned to his work, his movements unhurried. It struck him how the farmer didn't pull the fruit before it was ready. He simply caught it when it fell. That was the way of certain doors, forcing them only bruised. What was meant to arrive in its own perfect time? He continued along the path until he came to a small stone bridge arched over a stream. The water beneath was clear, sliding over smooth rocks in ribbons of silver and shadow. He leaned against the cool stone railing, listening to the steady murmur, and thought of the blue door again. It had not required effort. It had required readiness. "I allow myself to be ready for what I've asked for," he thought. Readiness is the only real key. On the other side of the bridge, the trail narrowed and led into a grove of tall cypress trees. The air there was diffrankler, carrying the scent of earth and resin. He walked softly, each step sinking into the cushion of fallen needles. Somewhere in the distance, a bell rang low, resonant, calling to something in him he couldn't name. Following the sound, he came to a building half hidden by ivy. It was not a church, though it carried the same sense of reverence. The door was carved with spirals and constellations, the wood polished to a deep sheen by years of touch. He stood before it, the key warm in his pocket, and closed his eyes. In his mind, he walked into the space beyond. He imagined shelves of books and scrolls, a quiet desk by a high window, the scent of old paper and candle wax. He imagined the stillness, the way ideas would settle into his mind like leaves landing gently on water. When he opened his eyes, the image was still there, overlaid on the carved wood like a second reality. He drew the key out and placed it in the lock. It turned with a soft click, and the door opened inward to reveal exactly what he had seen, though richer, deeper, more vivid than his mind alone could have created. The room breathed with a quiet warmth, light spilling across the pages of open books, as if the sun itself had paused to read. He stepped inside, his fingers trailing along the spines of the nearest shelf, titles whispered in languages he didn't recognize. Yet he felt them rather than read them, stories of futures he might yet live, each one alive in its own way. A tall chair sat before the desk, and on it rested a single sheet of paper. He sat, the wood cool beneath him, and read the first line. You are always walking toward what you are ready to receive. The words were simple, but they rooted into him, as if they'd been waiting for this exact moment to be seen. The room seemed to hold its breath with him, and in the stillness, he felt a subtle shift that came when a belief became a knowing. He left the building slowly, closing the door with a touch as gentle as a farewell to an old friend. The bell rang again, softer now, and he knew it was time to return to the town. Yet, as he walked back through the grove, the thought stayed with him like a low, steady flame. Every imagined door is already open inside me. My life only needs time to catch up. The afternoon light was soft and slanting when he returned to the town, the air tinged with the scent of ripening figs. He walked along the cobblestone streets, noticing details he had somehow overlooked before. The way the worn stones held the warmth of the day beneath his feet, the slow sway of laundry lines overhead, each cloth moving as if in unison with his breath. The key was in his pocket, its weight familiar now, like a heartbeat he carried outside his body. He stopped by a small bakery, the windows fogged from the heat of the ovens. The baker, a woman with flour dusting her sleeves, slid a loaf of bread onto the counter with a smile. Still warm, she said, her voice carrying that quiet generosity that made simple. The streets began to thin, giving way to a path that wound up toward the cliffs on the far side of town. The climb was slow, deliberate. Each step seemed to echo a truth forming inside him, that nothing truly important was ever rushed. The sea came into view gradually, first as a strip of deep blue on the horizon, then widening until it filled the sky's edge entirely. Waves moved with an unhurried certainty, as if they knew there was no race to run, no final destination, a constant arrival of each moment. At the top of the cliff, he found a bench carved from stone. The wind here carried a different voice cooler, more insistent, whispering through the grasses at the cliff's edge. He sat and let his eyes follow the horizon. The sun's reflection shimmered across the water like a path made of liquid gold. He closed his eyes and, without prompting, the thought rose in him. I am already walking this golden path. Every step I take is leading me where I belong. He stayed like that for a long while, letting the rhythm of the sea match the rhythm of his breathing. The key was warm in his hand now, as if it had been charging with a light. He knew without knowing how that there was another door nearby, not hidden, but waiting. Leaving the bench, he followed a narrow trail that seemed to invite him forward. It led to a weathered wooden cabin, half buried in wildflowers. The door was plain, unmarked, yet the air around it seemed denser, as though time had gathered here in layers. He stood before it and, as always, began within closing his eyes, building the inner version of the space. This time, he imagined a room with walls of glass, opening to an endless view of the ocean, a desk facing the horizon, and a single chair placed to catch the morning sun. When he opened his eyes, the image stayed. The key turned easily, the door opening to reveal exactly what he had pictured, though richer, the scent of salt air mingling with the faint aroma of cedar wood. The room was silent, except for the gentle hush of the waves below, their sound a constant reminder of movement and rest existing together. On the desk lay a journal, its cover bound in soft leather. He opened it to find the first page already written. All alignment begins with feeling it before you see it. He traced the words with his fingertips, allowing them to settle into him like seeds into fertile soil. Without thinking, he whispered, "I feel it now. I choose it now." The chair by the glass wall welcomed him, the cushion molding to his shape as he sat. From here, the ocean stretched to forever, and he imagined each wave carrying some answer, some unseen opportunity to his shore. In the quiet, a certainty unfolded. Prosperity wasn't something that arrived from outside. It was a tide rising from within, meeting the outer world halfway. He wrote in the journal, his words slow and deliberate. "Every door opens first in my mind. Every vision I hold is a key I turn. I let myself live in the feeling of having it now, and life answers me with more." Each sentence felt like a thread being woven into the fabric of the day. When he finally stood to leave, the light had shifted. The sun now lay lower in the sky, painting the water in deeper golds and softer blues. He locked the door behind him, not to keep others out, but to honor the stillness inside. The path back to the town seemed shorter now, though his steps were the same as he walked. He thought of the truth the key had shown him again and again, that the doors were not challenges to overcome, but mirrors reflecting what he believed possible. And as the evening bells rang in the distance, he understood possibility was infinite, but alignment made it visible. The afternoon light was soft and slanting when he returned to the town, the air tinged with the scent of ripening figs. He walked along the cobblestone streets, noticing details he had somehow overlooked before. The way the worn stones held the warmth of the day beneath his feet, the slow sway of laundry lines overhead, each cloth moving as if in unison with his breath. The key was in his pocket, its weight familiar now. Like a heartbeat he carried outside his body. He stopped by a small bakery, the windows fogged from the heat of the ovens. The baker, a woman with flour dusting her sleeves, slid a loaf of bread onto the counter with a smile. "Still warm," she said, her voice carrying that quiet generosity that made simple words feel like gifts. He paid her and held the loaf close, the scent filling the air around him as he continued walking. The streets began to thin, giving way to a path that wound up toward the cliffs on the far side of town. The climb was slow, deliberate. Each step seemed to echo a truth forming inside him, that nothing truly important was ever rushed. The sea came into view gradually, first as a strip of deep blue on the horizon, then widening until it filled the sky's edge entirely. Waves moved with an unhurried certainty, as if they knew there was no race to run. No final destination, no final destination. A constant arrival of each moment. At the top of the cliff, he found a bench carved from stone. The wind here carried a different voice, cooler, more insistent, whispering through the grasses at the cliff's edge. He sat and let his eyes follow the horizon. The sun's reflection shimmered across the water like a path made of liquid gold. He closed his eyes and, without prompting, the thought rose in him. I am already walking this golden path. Every step I take is leading me where I belong. He stayed like that for a long while, letting the rhythm of the sea match the rhythm of his breathing. The key was warm in his hand now, as if it had been charging with a light. He knew without knowing how that there was another door nearby, not hidden, but waiting. Leaving the bench, he followed a narrow trail that seemed to invite him forward. It led to a weathered wooden cabin, half buried in wildflowers. The door was plain, unmarked, yet the air around it seemed denser, as though time had gathered here in layers. He stood before it and, as always, began within closing his eyes, building the inner version of the space. This time, he imagined a room with walls of glass, opening to an endless view of the ocean, a desk facing the horizon, and a single chair placed to catch the morning sun. When he opened his eyes, the image stayed. The key turned easily, the door opening to reveal exactly what he had pictured, though richer, the scent of salt air mingling with the faint aroma of cedar wood. The room was silent except for the gentle hush of the waves below, their sound a constant reminder of movement and rest existing together. On the desk lay a journal, its cover bound in soft leather. He opened it to find the first page already written. All alignment begins with feeling it before you see it. He traced the words with his fingertips, allowing them to settle into him like seeds into fertile soil. Without thinking, he whispered, "I feel it now. I choose it now." The chair by the glass wall welcomed him, the cushion molding to his shape as he sat. From here, the ocean stretched to forever, and he imagined each wave carrying some answer, some unseen opportunity to his shore. In the quiet, a certainty unfolded. Prosperity wasn't something that arrived from outside. It was a tide rising from within, meeting the outer world halfway. He wrote in the journal, his words slow and deliberate. "Every door opens first in my mind. Every vision I hold is a key I turn. I let myself live in the feeling of having it now, and life answers me with more." Each sentence felt like a thread being woven into the fabric of the day. When he finally stood to leave, the light had shifted. The sun now lay lower in the sky, painting the water in deeper golds and softer blues. He locked the door behind him, not to keep others out, but to honor the stillness inside. The path back to the town seemed shorter now, though his steps were the same as he walked. He thought of the truth the key had shown him again and again, that the doors were not challenges to overcome, but mirrors reflecting what he believed possible. And as the evening bells rang in the distance, he understood possibility was infinite, but alignment made it visible. As you rest here now, let your body sink into the comfort beneath you. Feel the weight of the day dissolve, piece by piece, like mist in morning light. There is nothing to solve in this moment, nothing to chase, only this quiet space where your breath flows easily, and the world waits gently outside. Somewhere in your mind, there is a door. It doesn't need to be found, it only needs to be felt. This door has no lock that resists you, no barrier that doubts you. It opens with the quiet certainty of your own willingness to allow. And when it opens, it does not lead to a single room, but to countless paths of possibility, paths, already aligning with your deepest ease and joy. You are not here to earn this opening. You are here to allow it. The more you feel the ease of it now, the more the next step appears naturally. Like a garden that blooms without asking the flower to prove itself, Your life expands without demanding you to push. The less you strain, the more the way clears. So, in this quiet space, let the words settle into you like gentle ripples on still water. I allow. I receive. I trust what comes is for me. I do not rush the bloom. I enjoy the unfolding. Every door I open within becomes a door I walk through in life. Rest with that feeling. Let it wrap around you like the warm air of a night garden. Every breath is another soft yes to the universe, and every yes is matched by something beautiful already moving toward you, and now you can drift. There's no need to watch the clock. You are already exactly where you need to be, and the next door will open in perfect timing, just as it always has, just as it always will. He smiled, holding the key lightly in his palm. The last door had opened not in the world around him, but in the quiet certainty within. And from that moment, every step felt like home.